So you want to buy a diamond mine. Here's the part nobody tells you before you spend $1 billion chasing rocks. The entire diamond industry. The rarity, the romance, the forever. Almost none of it is real. Diamonds are not actually rare. There's enough of them sitting in vaults right now to crash the market overnight. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly who's hiding that stockpile, why a lab can grow you the same stone for 1/10 the price, and why the people who control this industry need you to never find out any of this. So let's open a mine and see what happens. Let's start with the man who built the whole thing, because his story explains everything that follows. In 1871, a sickly 18-year-old named Cecil Rhodes arrived in South Africa, sent there by doctors who thought the climate might save him from tuberculosis. He had almost no money, just a hand pump he rented out to other diggers who were struggling to keep their mining pits from flooding. From those rental fees, he started buying up small claims around the diamond fields of Kimberley, one at a time, picking them off cheap from miners who were going broke as new deposits kept flooding the market and crashing prices. Within 2 decades, the sickly young man with the water pump had bought, bullied, and merged his way into owning nearly every diamond mine in South Africa. He named the company De Beers, after the farm where the first diamonds were found, and somewhere along the way, he had figured out the one thing that would define the next century of this industry. The problem with diamonds was never finding them. It was that there were too many. A diamond mine isn't one business. It's 3 completely different bets depending on where you dig. The cheapest entry point is alluvial mining, basically panning riverbeds and old floodplains where diamonds have washed downstream over millions of years. Setup cost, around $5 to $15 million. But the yield is a lottery. Then there's open pit mining, the kind you've seen in photos of Russia's Mir mine. A hole so big, it creates its own wind currents that can pull helicopters out of the sky. Building one of these costs $500 million to $1 billion. And finally, underground mining when the open pit runs too deep to be safe. South Africa's Cullinan mine goes over 1,100 meters down. Construction alone runs past $1 billion, and you're now operating what is essentially an underground city just to chase rock. But before you dig a single shovel today, you need a license. And this is where most billionaires quietly walk away, something Rhodes himself never had to deal with back when colonial South Africa let him simply claim and merge land with almost no oversight. In Botswana, home to some of the richest diamond deposits on Earth, the government doesn't just tax you, it owns 50% of your operation through a state partnership. Russia requires a government-approved partner before you can even survey the land. And in parts of West Africa, the paperwork alone takes 3 to 5 years. While local militias sometimes control the actual ground you're trying to mine. This is exactly why so-called conflict diamonds became a global scandal in the 1990s and 2000s. Armed groups funding wars by selling rough stones with zero paperwork. The industry's response was the Kimberley process, a certification system meant to track every diamond's origin. It sounds reassuring until you learn the loophole. It doesn't check how the diamond was mined, only that it didn't directly fund a recognized rebel group. A diamond mined using child labor can still get certified clean. Back when Rhodes was still alive and consolidating his hold over Kimberley, he did something brilliant and ruthless once he controlled the supply. He created a single buying channel called the Central Selling Organization. Every miner had to sell through it. And when supply ran high and prices threatened to fall, De Beers simply locked the extra diamonds in vaults and refused to sell them. Not destroyed, not lost, just hidden, waiting year after year, decade after decade. By the 1980s, De Beers controlled over 80% of the world's rough diamond trade, and its vaults held an estimated stockpile worth billions. Diamonds that physically existed but were never allowed to reach the market. One company, sitting on a mountain of rock, deciding what the rest of the planet was allowed to believe. it was worth. In 1947, decades after Rhodes had died, De Beers hired an ad agency and created 4 words that finished what he started. A diamond is forever. Before that slogan, engagement rings with diamonds weren't even standard practice. The campaign convinced an entire generation that love had to be measured in carats, and that reselling your diamond was basically admitting your marriage failed. That's the reason the diamond resale market is famously terrible today. Most diamonds lose 30 to 50% of their price the moment you walk out of the store, because you paid retail markup on a stone with almost no secondary market liquidity. You're not buying an asset. You're buying a story, and the story was finished by an ad agency using the supply system, a tuberculosis patient with a water pump built 70 years earlier. Now here's where it gets genuinely dangerous for your billion-dollar mine. In 2012, scientists figured out how to grow a diamond in a lab in weeks instead of needing the Earth to do it over 1 billion years. Lab-grown diamonds are chemically, physically, and optically identical to mined ones. Even experts need specialized equipment to tell them apart, and the price gap is brutal. Lab-grown diamonds currently sell for 80 to 90% less than mined ones for the same carat and clarity. In 2016, they were a rounding error in the market. By 2024, they made up over 50% of all diamond engagement ring sales in the United States. De Beers panicked so hard, they launched their own lab-grown brand, Lightbox, in 2018, deliberately pricing it cheap to send a message: lab diamonds are costume jewelry, not the real thing. They shut that brand down in 2024 because the cheap pricing accidentally proved the opposite point. Lab diamonds were the smarter buy, not the lesser one. So if natural diamonds aren't actually rare, and lab diamonds are the same stone for a fraction of the cost, how is your billion-dollar mine supposed to survive? The honest answer? Through marketing, not math. The entire pricing model depends on convincing buyers that natural carries a premium worth paying. The same way some people pay more for something handmade over something identical that's machine-made. Once that emotional premium erodes, and lab diamonds suggest it's already happening fast, the floor underneath natural diamond prices isn't physics. It's belief, and belief is the one thing Cecil Rhodes never figured out how to mine. Let's talk about what actually breaks the bank on a real mine. To find 1 carat of gem-quality diamond, you typically have to process 200 to 250 tons of ore. A mid-size processing plant alone costs $200 to $400 million to build before you've found a single stone. Most major mines sit in arid regions, so water has to be trucked or recycled at a cost of tens of millions a year. Underground mines need constant ventilation and pumping to prevent flooding, another tens of millions in power. And then there's security, because your product is small enough to fit in a pocket and worth more than gold by weight. Major mines run private security forces, biometric scanning rooms, and sealed transport routes. Easily another $10 to $20 million a year just to stop your own employees from walking out with the product in their shoes. There's also a risk that doesn't show up on any spreadsheet until it's too late. Geology lies to you. Diamonds sit in narrow volcanic pipes called kimberlites, and concentration can vary wildly between one section of the same pipe and the next. Companies have sunk hundreds of millions into a deposit based on promising early samples, only to hit a barren stretch 100 meters deeper. You can do everything right on paper and still dig a billion-dollar hole that gives you nothing but gravel. There's also the human side of this business that rarely makes it into the pitch deck. Large mines employ thousands of workers, many of them living in company towns built specifically around the mine. Entire communities whose economy rises and falls with a single hole in the ground. When Rhodes was buying up claims in the 1880s, the labor system he helped establish included compound housing where black miners were confined on site for the length of their contracts, searched daily to prevent theft of the very stones they were digging up. Versions of that same compound system modernized but structurally similar, still shape how some mines operate in parts of southern Africa today. When De Beers later positioned itself as a champion of ethical sourcing through the Kimberley process, it was in part trying to clean up a reputation problem rooted in the very system the company had built. And once you do find diamonds, you're still at the bottom of the value chain. A rough diamond goes through cutting, polishing, grading, and certification before it reaches a jewelry counter. And at every step, someone else takes a cut. By the time your raw stone becomes a finished certified diamond in a display case, the markup from mine to retail can be 4 to 10 times what you were originally paid. As the miner, you absorb all the geological risk, all the security costs, all the political exposure, while the biggest margins go to the cutters, certifiers, and retailers downstream. Now let's actually run the numbers. Scenario 1. A mid-sized open-pit mine, total investment around $800 million. In a good year, it produces roughly 4 million carats of mixed-quality stone. After processing, royalties of 10 to 15%, security, and labor, your realistic net margin lands around 20 to 25%. On revenue of roughly $600 million a year, that's $120 to $150 million in profit, with a payback period of 6 to 7 years. Scenario 2. You get unlucky. Lab-grown diamonds keep eating market share, natural prices soften by 20%, and a government renegotiates your royalty terms mid-contract. Something that's happened in multiple African nations over the past decade. Your margin collapses toward 5 to 8%, and your billion-dollar mine barely covers its own operating costs. Cecil Rhodes died in 1902, still young, the tuberculosis that brought him to Africa finally catching up with him. He never saw the 1947 ad campaign, never saw the lab-grown threat, never saw his stockpile strategy turn into the largest controlled scarcity scheme in business history. He just saw a water pump, then a mine, then 100 mines, and a simple idea. If you control how much of something the world is allowed to see, you control what it's worth. That idea outlived him by well over a century, and it's still the only thing standing between your billion-dollar mine and a market that would otherwise be flooded. So if you're still set on buying that mine, remember what you're really betting on. You're not betting that diamonds are rare. They're not. You're betting that millions of people will keep believing they are for long enough to pay back your $1 billion before the lab down the street convinces them otherwise.